Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on what time you're looking at this podcast. Podcast we call Race, Culture, and the Church. Race, Culture, and the Church. Again, as I like to describe our what race, culture, and church means with respect to this podcast, think of it as a Venn diagram with three circles, one being race, one being culture, one being the church. And if we can intersect all three of those circles, we will have achieved our ultimate goal. But at the very least, try and hit two out of the three circles. But I am very pleased to welcome into this space Chief of Police, Kathy Lester for the City of Sacramento. Chief, welcome back.
So good to be back. Thanks for having me back on the podcast. I appreciate it.
I wouldn't have it any other way. I guess I would, if I could change anything, I would change the circumstance. Yeah. And I really appreciate to you and to your staff for just moving heaven and earth to come back into this space to record this. It's been about 4 weeks or so since the incident in Memphis with Tyre Nichols. And I wanted to invite you back to get your take and to ask you some questions specifically to that, and then obviously bring that home to what does that mean for Sacramento, Sacramento Police Department, Oak Park, our community. But I'll just let it go at that. It's been a few weeks. I bet the last few weeks have been very busy for you. Just catch us up broadly. Where are you? Where is the department in terms of responding to that situation?
Yeah, I think the need for really any kind of immediate police response is now really just not even necessary. And that's not the conversation that we need to be having, over this. But I can tell you, we knew that there was a video that was going to be coming out and it was going to be very bad and didn't know what that was going to look like. Kind of my first indication was last Monday when the family saw the video, and there was a press conference afterwards about how they felt about it. And, they didn't go into great details, but, obviously left us, very, very concerned. We didn't have a real clear timeline on when that was going to be released to the public. And I can tell you, one, I was, really concerned about what I was going to see, because we are law enforcement. There are obviously a ton of agencies across the country. And when one agency has an issue, an incident, we all aware what happened, even if we're thousands of miles away. And knowing that and knowing the tense relationship that law enforcement has in our community sometimes and how events can really just ignite emotions and action, not always in a positive way. I was concerned. So, out of an abundance of caution, we really did kind of stand up our department to make sure that we were ready for really anything, kind of really hoping for the best response from the public, which we have seen. And, I'm very thankful for that and thankful for all of the leaders and especially the family that called for peace, but certainly from prior experience, knowing that we also have a duty to protect people that are, that want to demonstrate, that want to have their voices heard, and also to protect our community from damage, vandalism, anyone who wants to hijack that message. And that's a very, it's a very sensitive area. So, we watched here in Sacramento, the Sacramento Police Department, we watched with the world when that video came out. And, I think for everyone, it was really hard to watch. I've watched the one time, and I don't know that I really ever, want to watch it again personally, because it's just, I think a lot of people feel that way. I think a lot of people may not even want to watch it. And I think it's really a personal choice, but it's just so hard on so many levels. And so I think for us, it's, you've got your response as a law enforcement agency, a law enforcement officer, but as a human being for sure. And, I'm very careful, usually, as a matter of course, to, be very careful about not passing judgment. That's always what we ask from the public. Like, let due process happen, let things play its course. But this was so egregious and so unexpected. I think that we all in law enforcement really felt a visceral reaction, like many people did. And even, I can't say that it was, better or worse, but I would say it's a little bit different because, we spend our whole lives, at least I do, and I know many members of our department do, trying to do the best we can for our community, treat people with respect, trying to help people. And, we know there's a narrative out there that is not what people believe. And what we saw on that video just reinforced that narrative and set us back, I think, quite a bit.
Well, you shared before that there are 18,000 police departments. So I know you don't represent all 18,000 police departments. You represent Sacramento Police Department. And so I guess along those lines, I won't ask you to atone for the sins of other departments, but let's just talk about how Sacramento would respond in a situation like this. So there's obviously this, what seems to be a recurring pattern of bad incident, community response, thoughts and prayers, maybe a commission, maybe there's some remuneration to the family, and we go on about our life, and then something like this happens again. This is the ultimate Groundhog Day type of event. So I guess my question is embedded in a question about culture, about, in this situation in Memphis, you have 5 African-American officers that took it upon themselves to abuse and ultimately kill an African-American man. You had EMS folks there, you had fire department there, you had a whole bunch of folks that are in a position to serve, to protect, to help, and I won't put words in your mouth, but I think you touched on it, just an absolute demonstration of a lack of humanity.
Yeah.
So what is it? And I won't even ask you to go there, the third circle on the church piece, but what is it about? Is there a culture of that is disconnected? Is it us versus them? Is it how internally to Sacramento Police Department? How does the rank and file police officer view her or his job with respect to community?
I think that's a really unique, it's almost an individual question sometimes. And I think you're absolutely right. It is a matter of culture. And I'm going to be very clear. I know nothing about the Memphis Police Department. I don't know anything about their training. I don't know anything about the unit. We've been asked, and like, I can't relate. Yeah, I can't relate to that, but I can tell you what I know and what, we do here. And I do see, because we see the same issues, and I came out and made a pretty strong statement about how, police are in a very unique position in our society, right? You are given the authority to enforce the laws and ultimately, use an immense amount of force to protect the public. It's a huge responsibility. And with that, you have a responsibility to the community to do the right thing and what is expected. And I think that's even greater, that expectation and being able to honor the privilege that you're given to serve. And I feel like sometimes in law enforcement, we forget that that's the basic premise under which we are to operate and why we act on behalf of the communities that we serve. And I think, you can say it can be an us versus them. You put people into a box, you see the same thing day in and day out, but then you're not doing what you gave an oath to do, and you're not serving in the way that you need to serve. There's a really great book, and it's it's a little bit older now. I think it came out in 2015 by Cedric Alexander, and he helped. He's got a very long and really different kind of background between education and his professional career. Has kind of moved into different realms and has worked in public safety, but it's called The New Guardians, and this came out, right around the time of Ferguson, and it really, I think, does a really great job of outlining what the expectation should be for police in America. And one of the things that really resonated with me, sometimes you forget the power of words, or you don't really understand their impact. And in the book, he talks about the guardian mentality for sure. But one of the things he talks about was, we've always declared things like a war on crime, a war on drugs. And he says, if you declare something as a war, there are winners and there are losers. There's no in between. You're not looking for a solution that works for everybody. You're looking to defeat. You're looking to oppress. You're looking to be the winner. And you think about that in just our everyday language. And if you're declaring a war on crime or a war on drugs, someone's going to be, the aggressor and someone's going to be the defeated. And so having that mentality and having that in sort of the culture, is an indicator of some changes that we, certainly need to make. And, I also think it comes down to the role of basic human respect. And I'll tell you, I know in law enforcement, that's a critical aspect of what we do. But I see, and I think a lot of us see in the country and just in general, people's disdain for each other, disdain for people that are different, not wanting to explore, not wanting to seek friendship and understanding. I know you and I on Saturday, the day after, this video came out, we had the MLK celebration dinner. And I was honored to be a panel member and to kind of be asked about my thoughts on the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. And one of the questions was, what did you know about him? When did you really learn what a great man he was? And I was really impressed by the high schoolers, the middle schoolers that had written these great essays. And I kind of compared that to my experience, which was, I just didn't have, I think, a really good understanding. We knew he was iconic. We knew he had really led, one man was able to make these incredible changes and have this immense following, an impact, right? At a time when you didn't think change could actually happen. And, he was the youngest person at the time to win the Nobel Peace Prize. And he talked very openly about war, about poverty, about racial discrimination. Those were three things that he really, really fought for. And I thought when he was talking about some of the challenges that we have and why we really struggle, and this is back in the 60s, when he got the Nobel Peace Prize. This is part of his speech. He's talking about the inner realm and the external realm, and that we become so busy in society trying to fill our external needs and, really benefit from all of these things that a modern society offers. We're failing to feed our internal realm, the cultured side, the literature, being able to think critically, being able to be very curious about other people. And I thought that was incredibly insightful 60 years ago. Right now we talk about social media and how that drives how people think. We talk about, it seems like, we're a very materialistic society and we're not really feeding that inner realm. And when you look through that lens, I see that, in a lot of things. And I feel like we are really missing the mark as humans, just in general. I think that's gonna be a big challenge for us moving forward if we want to fix or if we want to improve these problems. And 60 years later, certainly some things have improved, but to your point, why are we still having these issues? And when I was talking about, we were talking about accountability, and yes, there will be accountability for this act. There's going to be accountability, and you're absolutely right. And it looks like the officials are moving forward to hold people accountable. There's obviously a lot that goes with that, but it's not. Accountability, in my mind, isn't enough. And you heard the difference between accountability and justice, and that was something really important, I think, that we talked about with George Floyd. And accountability isn't enough when you continue to ask yourself, like, why does this keep happening and what can we do to prevent it? Which means that we need to do something more. So I know I'm sort of
No,
going on and on. I was going to talk about
That's actually so. What is that something more? What is that something more? I mean, you're whether you know it or not, Chief, you're butting up against that third circle of church.
Yeah.
But what is that something more that that you see?
Well,
Both with the Sacramento Police Department, those that do you get one chance? Again, Bible would speak of to whom much is given, much is required.
absolutely.
You have, as law enforcement, you have an incredible amount of authority to do good and to do evil.
Yep.
Do you get one chance? I mean, what it can't be, I get a universal, ongoing, carte blanche, I can do no wrong.
Right. That doesn't, well, it shouldn't exist. And I think sometimes you may only get one chance. And, you know, when I know everyone's really struggling in every profession to hire the right people, to get the right people in their organization. You know, I think every job market is struggling to find qualified people. But when we have the opportunity to hire someone, we're really looking for someone to bring into our organization that represents the values that we're looking for. And one of the simple questions I ask when I interview, you know, people coming in is just kind of what their thoughts on service and what that means to serve. And the reason I ask that question is because we do have issues with trust, and that's absolutely to be expected and reasonable for what we've been through in this country, and the very I think complicated relationship between law enforcement and our communities, especially communities of color. Like, we are here for a reason, and to discount it or say I'm not part of it or I wasn't here 60 years. It wasn't me.
It
right?
wasn't me.
That
So,
doesn't matter,
yeah.
right? Yeah, okay. And I know that there were a lot of advocates for the civil rights movement across all races, but yet we as a country, you know, we still own that. And so when I talk to people, I said, look, you've got multiple opportunities every day to affect change. And quite honestly, most of the contacts we have with the members of our public are not enforcement contacts. You know, we're not arresting people on every call, but there's an opportunity to talk to people, and you can leave the interaction not better and not worse than when you found it. You can leave it worse depending on, you know, how you behave or how you handle the situation, or you can leave it better. And our goal should be to leave every action in a better place and have a positive outcome. And as much as I really believe in, you know, big initiatives and policies, and I think those are important, and having the laws to make sure that we have a structure for what we do, you know, I can tell you that if you don't know how to treat people the right way and you don't exhibit those actions, no amount of law, policy, anything is going to change that. And that's like to your point about culture. So what is the culture of your organization? What is tolerated informally? And we know what's tolerated and not tolerated formally. That's what your structure is. Those are your policies. That's your training. That's the standards and expectations. I think a lot of it comes down to what's informally allowed, you know, because I think that's really where behavior is driven. And it's, you know, it's like any kind of behavior, you know, negative or positive. It's small steps, right? And maybe it's, you know, small steps in the right direction. Maybe it's small steps in the wrong direction. And if we don't have a culture that stops that from happening or prevents it from starting in the first place, you know, you can go down a very, very dark road. And that's something that we all need to be cognizant of. As leaders in law enforcement, we certainly have a responsibility to model that. Mm-hmm. And to model that with our expectations, to really reward the good behaviors that we want, and to certainly not tolerate behaviors within our organization that are not acceptable and we know lead, even if it's small stuff, because it's those small things that lead to the bigger things.
Well, to your point, or to build on that, one of my supervisors used to, his adage was, what gets monitored gets done.
Yes, what gets measured also is what's important.
So how do you, if you do, I'm assuming you do since you threw it out, monitor and measure those interactions, those behaviors. Just give window to look through. In my family, you had to you go out for the day. Look, son, you're a Meeks. You have to represent the family.
Yep.
And if you go out and act a fool, you're not only looking foolish yourself, but you're disparaging, you're casting a bad light on the family. And within the African American community, on the race. So there's always this, it's more than just you.
Mm-hmm.
It's more than just you. I want to believe, I really do, that the rank and file officer that you hire really embraces that this is bigger than me. My role, I put on the uniform, it says Sacramento Police Department. It's bigger than even the Sacramento Police Department. It's the community we live in. It's the state we reside in. It's the total interaction. And I get this crazy idea that, have you ever thought about having a non-police person be on the interview panel for police officers that are hired for the community? It's a novel idea. Yeah, it's like, well, the community would actually have input to actually polices the community. So I don't even know if there's a nexus there, but go ahead, Chief.
You're right. No, we actually do, as a matter of fact. And so maybe I can invite you to be on our panel at some time. For all promotions, we actually have community members come in and they ask questions and sit on the panels. And we've been doing it for quite a while.
For promotions. But not for entry.
Not for the entry level ones. That's kind of more of a standardized civil service process. But having said that, they do meet with every single, not every single, but they do meet with the deputy chief. They get an in-person interview. And then we have a long vetting process to really try and establish that culture. It's kind of, one of the things that I'm trying to bounce around here too much, but I know it's so important. And you see other companies, I worked in the private sector doing some not great jobs. I think, I've talked about that. I worked as a custodian. I worked as a, seating hostess. I worked at the phone company. And we really not only learned the technical skills of our job, whatever they were, but we also learned how important it was to treat your customer. And, the customer's not always right, but you certainly tried to work with them and help them and try and satisfy, as much as you could that they needed. And in law enforcement, I've realized over the years, we're very good at training. We're very good at teaching you how to drive a car, understand the law, write a ticket, trying to diffuse a situation. Great at the technical skills. But one thing that I think we've really missed is those personal interactions and how we can offer better service. And I can tell you there's only a handful of agencies that are really looking at the importance of service. I mean, it's really the core of what we do. We're here to serve. And yet
that's pretty depressing what you just said. There's just a handful
There's a handful that are taking this on as like a public initiative. We're one of them. And what I'll tell you what we're doing, we've looked at some of the private sector. For example, when you work for the Disney Corporation, there's an onboarding process and they're very clear about what their culture is and what they're expected to do and what, employees are, expected
There's a Disney University.
There is a Disney University.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And they do a lot of government training and talk about trying to build culture. Some of the other companies, whether it's Starbucks or Amazon, there's lessons to be learned from the private sector, but it's also a lesson that we have to absolutely understand our role. And I think that we still struggle with that. I really do. And that's got to come from leadership. That's got to come from expectations. To your point, how do you measure that? How do you measure the service? Well, we kind of know where we're at right now. The last few years, there has been a lot of research that's been done, like looking at police agencies, and we actually invited it in. One of the things, I had traveled up to Seattle probably 7 or 8 years ago, because Seattle at the time, and this is gonna, if you know how much video we released, you'd be surprised to hear this, but there was a time when we were trying to figure out, like, how do we release video in an appropriate way, so that we can protect privacy, but we can be transparent. And Seattle was doing it. So we traveled up to Seattle and learned a lot of things, including that they partnered with the university to survey what the community thought of their department. And so we thought that was a really good idea. And a couple of years ago, we entered into a contract with the University of San Diego to conduct a community survey of Sacramento, to see really what they thought about the police and police services. And we also surveyed the officers, and we based the officer survey on a study that was done back in 2016 by Pew called Behind the Badge. And the Behind the Badge study is interesting because it looks at how people of different races and ranks feel about their role as police officers. It also looked at some really, and you can find this online, really looked at some things about what officers felt about the nationwide protests that we were seeing, if they felt that they were justified, or if they felt like, no, they're absolutely not, and it's by a few number of people. Looked at callousness and how officers felt, if they felt angry, because you see a direct correlation between callousness and then people getting into physical altercations, which makes sense. If you're not if you're not a happy person, if you've got, a lot of challenges, you can see how you can be more confrontational. So there's lessons to really be learned from that when you now survey your agency. And when we surveyed our city, we found that we were pretty close actually to the national mark about what, other communities felt about their police department. And we didn't get great marks. I mean, we've put it out there, and I think that we really have only one place to go, and that's up. A fair portion said that the Sacramento police was good or very good, that we were generally responsive in their neighborhood. But was really interesting, and it's broken down between different geographic areas in Sacramento. Sacramento is very diverse, and we have a lot of different neighborhoods, and it does really vary from not only neighborhood to neighborhood, but by race. And so if we were looking at who rated our services as poor, African Americans were twice as likely to rate police services as poor or very poor. One of the things that came out of that study that wasn't exactly measured, but really is always stuck on my radar, are how people feel about the police if they're exposed to gun violence. Not necessarily a direct victim of gun violence, but if they're exposed to violence in their community, and how that affects their willingness to report or call the police for help, the trauma that has inflicted on them, their trust of the police. And when you think about the levels of violence that we have in some of our neighborhoods, and how, you and I have talked about this, how just having that kind of trauma in your life, even if you're not, a victim per se, is really, really challenging. And so, I think we know where we are. I think that in a lot of ways we're making strides to go in the right direction. And so now the question is, what do you do and how do you measure it? One of the things that I'm really, really trying to impart on people is the importance of service. And we're actually formalizing that. Like I said, we're really good at all the technical stuff, but when it comes to how do you end a call for service the right way? Do you just say, okay, have a good day, walk away? Or do you ask questions like, is there anything else I can do for you? Do you have any questions? Is everything, did we meet your expectations today? It seems really flippant, but when you have that mindset, I think you do a much better job of actually serving your community, because you really are now talking about their care and welfare and looking at people as humans versus that's just another call for service, or why am I going to this house again? Why can't they get it together? And separating yourself. And so I think it's a dynamic shift we need to make. And I'll end on this piece. One of I always have been a student of good leadership, and in police leadership, I would say one of my if not the most important mentor to me, somebody I've watched a long time, is now retired Chief Charles Ramsey. And so Ramsey came up in Chicago. He was working at a grocery store, never thought about being a cop until someone suggested it for him. And so he was going to go on and I think be a doctor, if I remember. I could get that wrong, but it was a completely different line of work. So he ends up joining the Chicago Police Department. He makes it almost to the very top and was second in command when he ended up going to Washington, D.C. to be the chief, and then ended as the commissioner in Philadelphia. And he's been in law enforcement for 55 or so years now. And one of the great things he does is he works on mentoring leaders in law enforcement, second in command, chiefs. And even before he did that, I always followed him because I really respected the things that he would say, how he carried himself. And he did a TED Talk a number of years ago, and I'll send it to you, actually. It's a great TED Talk.
Well, I know that Drew is going to have the lower third of that TED Talk, so go right ahead.
So the last maybe 5 minutes or so of this TED Talk, he's talking about what we have missed in law enforcement. It's really the importance of respect. And so I can tell you that, but he uses a great example. So I'm gonna try and share the example. I probably won't do it justice, but I'm gonna do my best. And he talks about coming up in the Chicago Police Department and how there was an officer named Paris Patton. And he says, you have some people that always can elevate the tension on a call. And you've got other people that no matter what can just calm it down. He says, Paris Patton was one of those guys. You'd have to go do a search warrant. You'd have to take people into custody. By the end of that call, he had made friends. He had formed an informant. He was just a great person. And he says, he remembered pulling Paris aside one time and say, man, Paris, how do you do this? Like, no matter what call we go on, like people just, they just seem to really get you. And he's like, well, it's really simple, actually. He's like, everybody is born a perfect 10. He says, take 3 points right off the top because, at some point we're going to die. We don't know when, we don't know how. He's like, so take 3 points off. He says, if you are a minority, take another 3 points off because quite honestly, there are doors that may be open to others that are simply not open to you. And he says, and if you grow up in a home or an environment of violence, of poverty, of dysfunction, of all of these societal ills that we have, take off another 3. And that leaves you 1 point. He says, this is what Paris tells him. That one last point, that's someone's sense of dignity. And he says, do what you have to do as a police officer, but never, ever, ever take away someone's sense of dignity because that is all they have left and they will fight you for it. And when you think about that, like what people have gone through, by the time lots of times police have interaction with somebody who's, in need of a police interaction, that's not typically when things started, right? There's usually a long history before. And so to not just make that immediate judgment. And I think that's tough in a way too, because you make that blink judgment on somebody because you have to assess the situation very quickly. The challenge is you can also assess it wrong, or you can be biased because you've seen so many things like that and you're not curious. You don't ask the right questions. One of my my favorite sort of community leaders said, when you have a really tough situation, you shouldn't go to someone and say, what's wrong with you? It should be like, what happened to you? And ask the question. And those are very different questions. They don't seem that way, but the perspective that you're coming from and what you're trying to obtain, completely different.
Correct. One, you're a victim, and the other, you're the one who caused the problem.
Yep.
Chief, I am totally out of time. I am still there with that community participation in the hiring. There's got to be an opportunity somehow to for the community to inject itself into that initial intake of people into the force. Won't ask you to unpack that now, but I guess to flip it around, the 5 officers that did what they did to Tyre Nichols, and I think it came out today, but it would have been my take anyway. That couldn't have been the first time they behaved badly. I don't think they went from good cop to bad cop in that one incident. And as I've been reading and following, it's like, no, there was a history here. There was a history there, but a culture allowed that to fester. It'd be unfair for you not to be able to respond, but but it's like, yeah. Here's the structure, but here's the culture.
Yeah.
You can write the report. You can stay within the lines publicly, but we'll back you up.
Yeah.
Culturally. I'll give you the last word.
I think you're absolutely right. And I think it's incumbent on all of us. And, we throw words around. They're not just words, but talk about transparency and accountability and, being open and really trying to understand. That's what people are trying to get to. They really want to understand. They want to believe. And what we all want is to know for sure that someone coming to help us is actually going to help us.
Correct.
And that's the challenge for law enforcement, is how do we show that? And we can do great work in a lot of areas, and we can, specific agencies, individual agencies can move that forward. But we, as a culture, as a profession, need to do that across the board.
But not just even show that.
Need to do it.
Be that.
Yeah.
Because who I am will actually evidence itself out.
Yep.
So I don't have to pretend to be anyone else other than myself. But if I'm Mark Meeks, African-American man with no hair, I don't have to pretend to be that.
Right.
I am that.
Right.
So, Chief Kathy Lester, I have no words to say thank you enough for your willingness to come into this space, to answer these questions, and to really be vulnerable in every sense of the word. I am privileged to be your friend, and then also to be a part of the service you provide here in Oak Park. So thank you very much for being part of this conversation.
Thank you. It was a great conversation. I appreciate you having me, and I really appreciate you allowing me to share my thoughts, as kind of broken up as they may be. I really try and speak from the heart. So thank you for asking such thoughtful questions. This is a difficult conversation, but I know that we in Sacramento are, we are great people and a great community, and we can have this conversation, as hard as it is, and figure out how we move forward together. So
I would say
appreciate it.
amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.